So a journalist asked the UN spokesperson a very simple question. And that question is, hey, is the US occupation of 1/3 of Syria illegal? Is it illegal? And as you're about to see here, the UN spokesperson's response is effectively, they don't have a response. So let's take a look and then we'll discuss.
Do you think the presence of the U.S. military in Syria is illegal or not?
That's not an issue that we're dealing with at this stage. There's been a war.
But is that because it sounds very familiar. This week we talk a lot about the UN Charter, the international law, and relative resolutions. But it sounds to me a foreign military-based presence in another country without invitation sounds like something else to me. You know.
I'll leave your analysis to you. There's at this stage.
What's the difference between Syria, the situation in Syria, and the situation in Ukraine?
There's no U.S. armed forces inside of Syria, and so I don't have a. It's not a parallel situation.
You're
to some of
sure
the
there's no U.S. military personnel?
I believe there's military activity.
Yeah.
But in terms of a ground presence in Syria, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, 5 U.S. service members were injured in that attack. If there were no U.S. service members in Syria, how could they got injured? That's weird, right? Should I ask you about that?
Oh man, that's embarrassing. Oh, that's so embarrassing. Oh. See, look, and this is a point we've been making for a really long time. You lose moral and ethical and legal credibility when you don't actually abide by international law. So, and the Iraq War was a perfect example of this. Us illegally invading and occupying a country that didn't attack us, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. That made it so that if some other country offensively invades another country, now we can't stand up and say, that's wrong. We're against doing that in principle. It's like, really? Well, you just did it. So how about you shut upsville until you figure your own stuff out, and then maybe we'll talk about it. So we lose ethical, moral, and legal responsibility. We lose, our word doesn't mean anything anymore. And that's a problem, because this guy asked the question, well, look, how's it different than what Russia's doing in Ukraine? And it's like, I agree with the meltdown over Russia offensively invading Ukraine. Russia's wrong. It's a war crime. It's an offensive war. But since we haven't abided by the same laws and the same principles, when we object, it's laughable. People are like, okay, fix your own problems and then you can comment on this. And that's a shame, man. If we never did the Iraq War, if we weren't occupying 1/3 of Syria to take their oil, by the way, which is what the former president said we were doing when we're there, right? Well, then maybe we would have more credibility when we say that, hey, this is a war crime. This is a war crime. And remember, guys, we learned just the other day that at the International Criminal Court, the Pentagon was trying to block charges against Russia. Why? Because they felt like, well, if the International Criminal Court can go after Russia for what they did in Ukraine, then they could go after the U.S. leaders for what they did in Iraq. And we didn't want to set that precedent. So they were like, hey, don't go after Russia and don't go after our elites. And I could not disagree with that more. I do want you to bring up charges against Vladimir Putin, and I do want you to bring up charges against Dick Cheney and George W. Bush. So, and look, they twist themselves into... I don't know. This UN spokesperson, how much does he know about international politics? Clearly not that much. But, like, it seems like he's bending over backwards to deflect and obfuscate from the U.S., right? To act like, well, if they do something illegal, it doesn't count. And that's the problem, is that, yes, it does count, and then you have more moral credibility to then turn around and criticize what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So, and by the way, it's not to say that the situations are perfectly analogous, but they're analogous enough, right? Like, the U.S. isn't trying to annex part of Syria to make it the U.S., right? In the same way Russia is trying to like annex Ukraine to make it part of Russia. So it's not perfectly analogous, but both actions are definitely illegal under international law. Whether you're invading a country and occupying it to jack their natural resources, or you're invading a country to occupy it, jack their natural resources, and annex it, both of those things are illegal under international law, and they should be. So you give the U.S.'s enemies have like easy layups in these debates because of the U.S.'s deep, deep hypocrisy on these issues. Look, I'm on Noam Chomsky's team on this one. I think international law should be upheld across the board, and we should actually enforce the laws so that we could create a more peaceful world. But the way it works now, it's the wild, wild west, man. You know, the U.S. gets away with everything, and in turn, everybody else gets away with everything, and it's just a mess. It's just an absolute mess. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.